oil prospect. So we could never work quite straightforwardly. When we wanted information, we had to create some kind of a notional prospect which we could get somebody to invest in to deliver the information we needed. But the Soviets weren't so constrained. They had the Department of Exploration who worked on 5-year plans and drilled where they wanted to. So when they wanted to evaluate something, they went about it in a very sensible way. They drilled wells to gather the most information, to learn what the regional situation was, and then from that good base they moved into the actual search for oil itself. And so their record actually is far in advance of what the West had to do under this financing problem. Also, the Russians were really at the forefront of this geochemical revolution that understood what it truly was, because they were able to fund the research in their kind of communist academic way to do so. So no one should dismiss the skill of the Russian explorers. On the other hand, their drilling equipment was a bit primitive, their seismic facilities were rather poor. So they did have, they weren't at the cutting edge of technology, but their intelligence was as good or better than ours. And so the Russians had a great boom of discovery. And when again coming back to the distribution of oil and the fact that it's concentrated in a few places, an intelligent geologist can find the prime areas, and within the prime areas you find the giant fields. So this was done without sophisticated technology, as indeed in the West. Most of the West's oil was found with technology nothing more than a geologist's hammer. So, I mean, finding big early oil in the main provinces isn't that difficult. So the Russians found the bulk of their oil in the 50s, found all the big provinces and most of the giant fields within them. Now we enter another reporting problem. Into the Russian system, they had no sense of economics at all. And so their reserve estimates went the other way compared with the West. They simply took theoretical volumes in the earth with no consideration at all about what was physically producible or economic. And so their reserve estimates were much higher than they should have been. So you've got to reduce Russian reports by a certain amount. And then towards the latter days of the Soviet Union, oil was one of its principal sources of income. And so they overproduced some of the reservoirs, and they took too much out, and they were damaging the reservoirs and so on. And then with the collapse of the Soviets, the whole industry fell apart and production dropped like a stone. Then over the last few years you've had the emergence of new Russian oil barons who would put Mr. Rockefeller to shame. These are ultra-capitalists who managed to acquire, and we won't ask exactly how, but they acquired the assets of the old Soviet Union, and now there's this Yukos oil company and Lukoil and Gazprom and so on. These big companies run by these oil barons in ultra-capitalist fashion. And now production is rising, in part making good what would already have been produced but for the collapse on the fall of the Soviets. And so we had the first peak of production in 1985, and then we've had a collapse due to the collapse of the communists, and now it's building again. And it's very hard to know exactly how much the Soviet Union has because of all of these uncertain reporting practices and so on. But it looks as if they could reach a peak again around 2010. And I think of about 10 million barrels a day. So for the next few years, Russian exports can increase, and the degree to which they will increase depends. Of course, the oil barons will like to export to get foreign exchange, which is something they like to have. But the degree to which the Russian government may wish to effectively subsidize its competitors by providing them with cheap energy is another day's work. And as Europe, within the next few years, finds itself utterly dependent on Russian gas, then we may imagine that the Russian government will have something to say about the price and the amount that they're willing to deliver. So that's the role of Russia. It does offer possibilities of exports for the next few years until it itself also reaches its natural peak and begins to decline. And superimposed on this you have really considerable geopolitical elements. I mean, you could say that that Russia will win a postscript to the Cold War without firing a shot, I suppose you could say.
What is the role of economics in hastening oil depletion?
My understanding is that the whole subject of economics was developed at the end of the Industrial Revolution or during it 200 or 300 years ago, at which time man was perceived to be the master of the environment in a planet of near limitless resources, which with his ingenuity and superbia, you could say, he would convert to his use. And this in a way reflected certain Darwinian attitudes of the time about survival of the fittest and all of those things. So the notion of economics developed with its ineluctable laws of supply and demand, whereby in an open market, provided there were no external constraints, demand would always be met by supply. If wheat prices went up, the farmer would grow more wheat and the system would automatically return to a certain equilibrium. And the world was perceived to be some kind of a marketplace of limitless possibility. And this mindset, as far as I can judge, has developed over the years, and it is extremely difficult for anybody with that background to accept resource constraints, most of all of something as critical as oil. In parallel with that, we have had the notion of substitution, whereby Stone Age didn't end because we ran out of stone due to man's ingenuity. We found something to take the place of stone that was better: bronze, iron, steel, computers, whatever you like to say. And so this too, it reflects itself in the way they view oil depletion. They say, oh well, once we've got rid of the conventional, we can turn to the non-conventional. When there's the demand for it, it will inevitably be matched. And the high priest of this whole viewpoint is Professor Adelman at MIT, and I can't quote his statement exactly, but it is something to the effect that how much oil was in the ground to begin with and how much is in at the end is irrelevant. The amount is infinitely large, and investment creates a continual supply of new reserves. This is the economist view of things, and it's very widely held. But it just doesn't stand up to this. After all, this is the first time in the history of man, you could say, that the world has faced the depletion of a very critical commodity for which there is no better substitute. There may be less satisfactory substitutes by all means. We can capture solar energy and we can do wind farms, and there are many things that we can do. We're not running out of energy by any means, but none of these things compare in economic benefit of cheapness and ease of use and convenience to good old oil. So we face a really radical change for which the whole subject of economics is not well adapted. And see, we are natural scientists who observe nature, and we're like historians. We can't change what nature gives us. And this is an entirely different mentality from the economist who doesn't recognize these constraints. He thinks everything is within the power of man. And I even hear it said that to go out and consume has almost become a moral obligation. You know, if the economy begins to lag for some reason, they try to get people out into the high street to consume. Well, that's the economist's view of solving the problem. From the other standpoint, you would say, well, this is simply accelerating our path towards the abyss when all of this stuff just isn't there, you know. How soon do you produce things is the question. Its rate. Do you want to burn it all up like Britain did? Or do you want to conserve things and find more sustainable ways to live more simplistically? And perhaps you could end with a commentary from the postmistress of Ballydehob in Ireland, a little village. And I asked her not long ago, I said, Peggy, do you think the world has got better in the last 50 years? And without hesitation she said, yes, of course it has. And then I said, well, was it bad before? And she thought a bit at that and she said, no, it wasn't bad before. We were as poor as church mice. She said, I can remember the first electric lamp bulb coming to Ballydehob in 1951.